Alright everybody, we're going to be starting very soon. Just waiting for some more people to join, and then we'll get going. Alright everybody, sorry about the delay. Had to make a quick phone call as well. So I had to get a hold of someone before the evening, because they were going to be closed by the time the stream was done. So, how's everybody doing? I know it's been a while since we've been on Twitch, but I'm glad to be back. We were trying out Facebook for a while, in case you guys didn't see that. And we had sort of mixed results with it. It was easy to get to a large crowd, but there were some huge problems with stream delay, and you know, not being able to have 1080p, it definitely also was you know, a factor. We like having this nice good bit depth where you can, you know, really see some of the detail of what we're working on here. So, as you can see, we're working on the Stormcast Eternal guy today. We're not trying to do anything too crazy with him. We just want to get a nice, you know, or you know, tabletop standard, yeah, but you know, maybe a little bit higher than what a lot of people consider tabletop. But we're not going like crazy competition level here either. We just want a playing piece to play the game, and we want that playing piece to look rather nice. So, let me get a glove on and we'll get to continuing with our work on this guy. And if you're new to this channel, or at least the painting aspect of the channel, feel free to ask any questions you have about anything at any time. If you are wondering how I painted a certain aspect of the model, even if I'm not currently painting that part of it, feel free to ask. Don't be shy. So I like for this to be an interactive stream as much as possible. Should be easy enough to do that if you want to ask questions or anything, because it's not going to be a terribly huge crowd. It's pretty modest stream here, so if you have any questions, I will definitely see them and I will definitely answer them. So right now, I'm working on the base. There's definitely, as you can see, other details in the upper body that need work. Like, you can see I've done some of the white on the cloak on the back. On the front, though, it's still rather thin, so we're going to get to that hopefully at some point today on the stream. But for now, I want to try to get this base worked out. Because they actually have, for Shadespire, something that's kind of neat and interesting that I actually like is that all of the different models have, or at least all the different war bands, let's put it that way, have sort of their own theme to their bases, but at the same time you can take these models from these different themes and put them into the same sort of fighting arena together, which is, in this case, the Shadespire game boards, and they all fit with the theme of the game boards enough that even though they have sometimes big differences between them, between warband to warband and how their bases are themed, when they face off against each other, they fit in with their backdrop very well. I'm hoping what I just said makes sense. I haven't had a whole lot of sleep, so I may just be rambling incoherently. Sorry if that is the case. Also, you may hear my cat yelling at me every now and then. A lot of my family is off on vacation right now, and so the cats are having some cabin fever, because usually there's someone to let them out every 5 seconds. And now they only have me, and I'm doing this. So, sorry, I think I found, yeah. Sorry, every now and then you find something that got stuck to the surface of your model, and you gotta rectify it, or else you paint on it more, it just becomes permanent. Alrighty. All better. Alright, that's a little too much. Let's, Now what I'm going for here with the paint scheme itself, so I'm trying to find something where a lot of the spaces that sort of dominate the model, like the gold, you know, just like the metallic parts in general, I try to find really easy ways to do them that don't require a lot of intensive brush work. So in this case, they are primarily done by a series of dry brushes. The exception of the silver, which, the first step is not, it's just like base coat of metallic and then wash and then dry brush. then it gives pretty decent results. You know, it's not going to be the, you know, amazing, really striking results you get with like non-metallic metal and so on, but it gives it, I think, in my opinion, a little bit more depth than going with, at least in the case of the gold, the metallic wash and then metallic again. Though metallic wash and metallic again, whether it's a dry brush or, you know, brush on, though that's of course still an extremely good technique, very solid, and gives you good results in a fairly short order. The way I did these was basically pretty similar, but instead of painting metallic on, then washing, I just painted it a solid brown color. It's just Mournfang brown, like you see this here on the bezel of this base. You know, the whole model was sprayed with the Mournfang brown spray. Then I went and touched it up by hand to make sure it was consistent in the places where I needed it to be consistent. You know, like on the armor where it was going to be gold. And then I did a series of dry brushes, starting with, like, you know, a really dark burnished sort of gold, working my way up to just a, you know, a very light dry brush of a light silver. But you could also easily start with the gold, wash it with you know, a brown wash like Agrax Earthshade, which, you know, it's a really easy go-to for stuff like that. And then just dry brush, either, you know, a couple of really light gold highlights, or a pure and you know, rather bright shade of silver as a highlight. Alright, you know, I'm just going to fill this because I'm going to wash in some Mournfang brown later anyway, so. Right now I'm just sort of picking out some of the different stones from the, you know, sort of inlaid stone of the floor to make them more look like they're rubble from something else. You know, make it look like not that they have sort of been churned up from the cobblestones, but that they were something that sort of fell off of something else, like a ceiling, onto the ground on top of the cobblestones, if that's what you could call them in this case. After all, the setting of Shadespire, in case you're unfamiliar, is a ruined city. Massive ruined city. Though large portions of it consisting of glass, we are not going to be painting shards of shattered glass here because that would be hard. That would take a lot of work, and while the results would be really cool and worth it if you could pull it off, we just don't have that kind of time. We want to have a warband and play the game. We just don't have the time for those shenanigans. Though there are definitely a lot of neat things you could do with this model if you had extra time to really spend on it. For example, this big log he's standing on. This was done primarily by a series of dry brushes, and I am not ready to call the log itself finished yet. I could and get away with it, but I may still want to do a few things with it. Like, I'm also going to paint the parts where the wood on the inside is in fact showing. You know, and sort of this hollow part, really not a whole lot you can do with because there's no texturing, so I just kind of minimized it in order to not draw a whole lot of attention to its featureless depths, but rather just sort of give it a quick treatment that made it at least not appear like too prominently. That's always one of those sort of, you know, difficult things when you're figuring out how you want to paint a model. Yeah, we'll have to touch that up. That's not going to just go away. One of the things you have to figure out is not only how you're going to emphasize the details you want people to see, the things, you know, that you want to stand out, but also, are you going to have to do anything to minimize areas that you don't want people really paying a lot of attention to? Things that, you know, you personally don't think are attractive parts of the model, or that don't really add anything to the model. They're just sort of there, and you want them sort of just to, you know, you want them to exist as a logical part of the model, but at the same time you don't really want to draw any attention to it. I'll give you an example, like when I paint my Death Guard, they have a whole lot of tubes and things coming out of their masks and stuff like that, and so I use Typhus Corrosion on them. I paint it like a metallic color, and then I paint, like silver, and then I paint Typhus Corrosion over them, because it really seriously dulls them and just makes them look like a corroded piece of tubing, which doesn't stand out much on the overall model. But at the same time, if you do notice it, you know, it looks like it should. It looks like you would expect something like that to look on a Death Guard model. So, let's see, we got 9 viewers now. That's good. That's good. Because it's been a little while since we've been on Twitch. We were on Facebook for a while, trying that out. Because if you normally keep up with bowls on Twitch, you'd probably notice that we were trying out Facebook for a little while to see how it would work as a platform for our streaming. And we wanted to see if it was going to get us, you know, sort of a better access to a broader crowd of people. And in a way it sort of did, but because of the technical limitations, we had, you know, you could only stream in 720, and they had some extreme stream delay. We just had too many problems with it. That's not to say that there won't be Facebook-related content at all, but the painting streams, you know, that are long shows that, you know, involve interaction, we're going to keep those on Twitch so that we can have the interaction we need, because the stream delay when you're doing Facebook Live, it's kind of strange. We would get it where it would start out with very little stream delay, but if you were watching the stream, you would notice that it would look like the stream would freeze for like a second and then would resume, and what it would do is it would buffer that entire time from the perspective of the viewer, and it would accumulate up to like 30 minutes of like 30 minutes of buffering. Well, not really buffering is what you'd call it, but basically their view of the stream would be backed up about 30 minutes from what it really was. So I would have to wait for when the stream ended, from my perspective, I would have to put it on an ending screen and leave it on for 30 minutes before I turned the stream off, or else people would not actually see the ending of it unless they went to the replay video. So it was, yeah, it was a very interesting experience, interesting experiment for us, but now our paint streaming is back to Twitch. Most of our shows were stayed on Twitch anyway. The painting shows were just sort of our, experimental platform. As the painting shows are a good place for that. Because there's sort of a lower risk element of what we do. So I'm going to do a little bit more work on these medium tone stones. Normally this would be 100% dry brushing, but because there's other elements that will get, I guess you could say, contaminated if we dry brush right onto things next to them. We have to be a little more cautious, and so we have to basically do sort of over brushing. Make sure I get the tones right. Yep, alright, good. Now when you have a base that consists of a lot of similar elements, like we have stone on stone here, you do want to try to break things up a bit. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to use all different colors on everything, but you do want to sort of change how the tone is sort of distributed. So in this case, like I'm making these stones that make up the solid ground a darker color, and then stones that have fallen down onto it, I am painting a lighter gray, but starting with the gray that I used to sort of do this first highlight I'm doing now on this stone ground. And that's one of the pitfalls. Of course, there can be many for doing a lot of dry brushing on a model, is that sometimes you find yourself trying to dry brush two surfaces that are right next to each other that have to be dry brushed completely different ways. And so you have to try to find a way to do it without without one contaminating the other. And that's not always easy. And so sometimes overbrushing can be a way to solve that. Preferably, if you're going to dry brush any elements of a model, you want to do all of those elements first, or separately, whichever the case may be, so that those are out of the way, and the stuff that you're doing more precise brush work with is the stuff that you can be a little bit more careful with and don't have to worry about getting paint in places where you don't want it. It's much harder to be precise with dry brushing, just by its nature. It's not a precision technique. It's made to get faster results that still look decent, but don't require nearly as much time. There I go. Itchy nose today. So, I haven't heard anything from chat yet. If you are watching the stream right now, if the audio is okay, if you can hear me just fine, if you can hear the music fine, and the video looks good, I'd appreciate you letting me know, just so we know that everything is working from the technical side here. If it looks like there are weird skips or delays, make sure you let me know about that too, because that's definitely something I want to know. Thanks, Rieger. Or Rieger, sorry, Riegermeister. Yep. I turned it up a little bit because you're actually just hearing the music as I'm listening to it over my speakers. So, well, you know, I did take 2 years of German, so I should be able to at least know how to pronounce the I-E combos, you know, the E and the I. But sometimes, if I'm trying to do it too quickly, I won't get it right the first time, but if I stop and look at it, I'll get it right. That's one of the quirks of English, as I'm sure you found, is that our IE combos are not pronounced consistently from one word to another. So that's the first rule of spelling in English, is there are no real rules. We pretend there are, but there aren't. English is in proper English, as in from the UK. Oh, nice. Yeah, I can't say I have much experience with London. I had like a brief layover in Heathrow once, and that sums up my experience with pretty much all of jolly old England. Someday I may rectify that and expand my experience there. It would be nice, because there's certainly quite a bit to see. I'm sure you're probably bored to death of it all by now, but for those of us inexperienced in the ways of London, it seems to be quite the sight to see. And now we're doing sort of the lighter highlight with our Administratum Gray. One of the lighter, if not one of the lightest, desaturated, I guess you could call it, grays that GW makes. Desaturated meaning it doesn't really have any color other than black and white to it. Maybe a scarce hint of some color other than just a mix of black and white, but not a whole lot. It makes a good color for stone or artificial sort of looking grays. Alrighty. So, as long as I don't go back and end up messing it up somehow, our grays might be good. Still trying to decide if the other cobblestones should have the lightest gray. Let me change the focus a little bit, because I adjusted it a moment ago, but I think I overestimated how close I would be to the camera. There we go. So that should be quite a bit clearer for you guys, since I'm kind of resting my hand here. Alright, let me just... Something to note when you do a lot of dry brushing, sometimes you'll find that you end up kind of dusting the model a bit. I recommend going and just taking a brush, you know, just a wet brush, no paint or anything, and either using water or good old saliva, just kind of wipe off any places where you see any lint or dust buildup, because when you do dry brushing you do get a lot of lint onto your brush from the paper towel, if you're using one. And you don't want that stuff to be permanized on your model. You want to, you know, send it on its way once you're finished. There we go. I was worried that was going to take some paint off when I took it off, but nope. So, as far as this log goes, you know, I'm kind of okay with the colors, but I think it needs more. I mean, the dry brushing I think was pretty successful given, you know, the contours of this model, but I think we're going to do something additional with this log, give it a little bit more life. But we'll come back to that later. Alright, so now I'm going to take Mournfang Brown. A very useful, versatile Citadel paint. I don't see too many other people using it all the time, of course. But for me, I find uses for it all the time. It's been handy for me painting these Stormcast Eternals. It's been handy for me painting my Death Guard. When I get around to painting my Ogres, unsurprisingly, since it's called Mournfang Brown, and Mournfangs are a unit in Ogre Kingdoms, well, what used to be called Ogre Kingdoms, turns out to be really handy for them. And really anything that has like a reddish leather or hide look to it, Mournfang Brown comes in very handy for. Unless, of course, you're looking for something a little bit darker, and then you go to Rhinox hide. But oftentimes I find myself starting with Rhinox hide for a dark leather, and then working it up into Mournfang Brown. That's something to keep in mind whenever you're painting leathers, is that you want just a little bit of, I mean, you don't have to have a bit of reddishness in there. You can have a dull brown leather color if you want, if that's what you're going for. Or you have like many different kinds of leathers and you need some of them to stand out differently from others. But for general use, I recommend going with sort of a rich color with a little bit of reddishness to it. And Mournfang Brown certainly provides that. Rhinox hide provides that. Even more so, I think. I think it's even more reddish. Sorry, a little Looking a little slapdash here. Probably should have waited for it to dry first, but alrighty. Now I'm gonna thin down some of my Mournfang brown, and we're gonna just do a little wash of it here to get back some of the separation in our details that was lost when we sort of had to brush on or overbrush our highlights rather than being able to dry brush them. Because of our nifty log here, we didn't want to mess it up. And the log itself is dry brush, so we didn't really have any choice in, you know, which one was gonna get dry brushed. Because if you were here a moment ago, you always do the dry brush stuff first, or at least that's what I said. In case you missed me talking about that earlier. That way, the more precise stuff, you know, the hand brush work later, can be done afterwards, and it has a much less chance of messing up your dry brushed stuff than dry brushing stuff has of messing up your more intensive brush work. So, sure, many of you who are experienced painters here can attest to the fact that the order of operations does in fact matter quite often when you are using certain techniques, like airbrushing, dry brushing. Those are two big ones where order of operations really matters a lot. If you're doing everything by just like wet blending or, you know, just by hand, not quite as important. And here I'm just going back with a wash of Mournfang brown, just diluting it and then going in here and putting it into recesses, just to bring back some of the separation of the different elements of the base that otherwise just would kind of be obscured together. A good example is right here. If you look where this stone meets the this sort of rubble here, you know, this wash allows us to sort of emphasize the separation, which is actually a little bit difficult because the way this model is constructed, this is actually a join here on the model. So when we put our wash here, some of it just gets soaked right into the join, which, you know, you could fill with gap filler, but the join is actually so subtle, only something like a thin fluid will go through it. So there we go. And never be afraid to touch up some of your dry brush work with actual brush work. Never hurts. Remember, the dry brushing is supposed to save you time, so if there is a faster way you can do something with actual brush work, just do that. Do that instead, as long as it doesn't create sort of a clash where the difference between dry brushing and brush work by hand would create like too stark of a difference. I'm just gonna I decided I need a little bit lighter highlights on this rubble because I'm gonna differentiate it by washing it a bit. Oh, that's a little too much. But in this case, not washing it with Mournfang Brown, but an actual wash. Because I feel like there's not enough separation between the way this rubble looks and everything else. It needs something to make it stand out as, sort of this detritus lying on the ground and not just like some rough texturing like they painted No Skid on their floors before Nagash showed up and, imprisoned their souls in their massive city. Alrighty. I'm going to take some Agrax Earthshade, what a lot of people like to call liquid cheat, and we will shamelessly employ it here. If you are new to miniature painting or unfamiliar with it and just watching just to sort of check out new and different things, washes like Agrax Earthshade are excellent tools for achieving really good shading effects with a minimal amount of time and effort compared to doing it all by hand. And in fact, sometimes it can be far superior depending on the application. And for anyone who is new to miniature painting, that is actually doing it as a hobby and not just looking at it in interest, it is probably one of the first techniques that someone will learn how to do. But even so, it is still one that takes a while to truly master. I have not truly mastered it, I will tell you that. There's definitely much I could learn about washing a model and really getting the most out of washes. Because when you really get down to it, there are a myriad of techniques that involve washing that can give you various different effects. a lot of times for weathering, achieving the right skin tone you want. And you'll see sometimes a painter will apply 3 or 4 different washes, sometimes even more, over one surface, just in a sequence, to get the look that they're looking for. And it's not that the first one, you know, they didn't like or anything, it's just part of the progression. You know, they want to start with a color that's going to sort of darken everything or unify everything in a particular way, and then, you know, add another one that changes the tone in some subtle way. And yeah, it can get pretty involved. But here we are using it in pretty much its most basic form to give us definition across a irregular surface here. In this case being a little rubble that we have. And already you can see in the places where it's already dried, it looks a lot different from the rest of the ground and is already sort of standing out on its own. A little bit better now. Not in like a super stark way, but I don't think that that's something we were going to achieve unless we painted the rubble like not gray. Alright, so if you were here earlier when I was talking about bases on Shadespire models and how they sort of have a semi-semblance of unity between all the warbands, in that, you know, they're all in the same setting, the city of Shadespire, a ruined and essentially haunted city. I say essentially, but what I really mean is very haunted. But despite them all having an appearance that matches the setting of Shadespire, they actually all differ quite significantly in the individual elements. And I'll show you an example here. Another one from another warband that's actually almost finished, Magor, came out the same day as this model. They're both the leaders of their individual warbands in Shadespire. As you can see, he's just about finished. But what I want you to notice is how different his base is. Now there's some leaves on this guy's base, and we need to paint those so you can see, you know, sort of how they contribute to the overall look. But as you see, he's got, you know, these crevices with blood or, you know, lava, like some people do lava, and skulls floating in it. And you could see how these two could go together facing off against each other on sort of like, you know, a gray stone battlefield, you know, in the middle of a city, and, you know, they could have some aesthetic cohesion, you know, in terms that they each fit into the setting, the same setting that they're both put in together, while at the same time they're both very different from each other in terms of like their individual bases and how their bases look. Here's one that has even more base surface here, the corn dog, as I like to call him, because he is a hound of corn. So you get an idea of the base aesthetic. Now this guy is quite a bit different. still, because the layout of his base, the way the stones are separated and things like that, it's still quite a bit different, regardless of the number of similarities that they have. They don't look quite like they're standing on ground of the same consistency. Not quite. I think we're ready for another dry brushed highlight. In this case, we can pretty much hit everything on the stone floor with this highlight, which is pretty much almost as much of an overbrush as it is a dry brush. As you notice, I haven't painted the bezel yet. The bezel is going to be a gray color as well, but we're going to wait. It's probably going to be like the last thing I do with this model before spray varnishing it is painting the bezel. So if you're getting tired of the dull gray stuff, rejoice, because we're almost done with it. And we can move on to something more interesting. But this is also an essential part because I can't really do any of the details on the base. Details being pretty much exclusively leaves or modifications to this tree, which I'm not totally happy with yet. Alright, Riegermeister, take care, bud. I'm glad you could stop by and have a look. Hopefully you'll join us again sometime. We should be here at 2 p.m. Central Time next week, so if you're around, you know, give us a look-see. Do not want that. In fact, we need a little bit more Mournfang brown here. Alright, I think we got the gray part of the stones done. Looking at I definitely can tell looking at the stream versus what I see. The grays definitely sort of just disappear one into the other on the streaming camera, but they're definitely much more distinct looking at it in person. Though not drastically so. I mean, they are all still, you know, different applications of the same 3 gray paints, so. Alright, I'm going to set this right here for a moment, and I'm going to find a good green for painting these leaves. Pour myself some more Dr. Pepper. Alright, I'm just gonna look something up real quick and see if I can find something that's a good reference model for leaves and borrow the color for that. That would save us a little bit of time. Okay, we got that. We got that. Let's see if I have the base one I recommend. Alrighty, let's see what we got. Yep, there it is. Alright. Hey, the cat's back. Oh, this is the, this is a different cat this time. I have 3 cats, in case anyone is curious. Probably no one. With no one else at home right now to entertain them, they occasionally come and beg me for attention, so it's not that I ignore them, but normally they don't come to this part of the house when there's anyone else around. So sorry guys, no cat cam. Oh hey, look who's here. Uh-huh. So here we're just picking out these leaves. And this is really, I think, and this is why I'm waiting until I paint these leaves before I decide what I want to change about the log. Because as you can tell, these leaves drastically change the way that the base looks and the way that the log looks in the backdrop of the base. So... Yes, you did just see me lick my model. Probably seen me do it several times already, actually. It's a pretty common tactic for when I see something that I'm like, yep, I need to get rid of that right now. And I know I don't have enough time to just wet my brush and wipe it out that way. It's one of those situations where you can say, yeah, we've all done it, but that may not be true, actually. I may be the only one, well, not the only one, but one of a few who does that. I could be wrong, could be widespread, but... There we go. Oh good, we got a few more people now. That's good. Well, welcome guys. We're working on one of the Farstriders from Shadespire. We're trying to get the base out of the way right now. Because of the construction of this model, I ended up having to sort of glue everything together. I wanted to do the base separately, but it just wasn't really that practical because there's this huge gap between some elements of where things come together, and I wanted to be able to put some green stuff in there and get everything fixed together beforehand as a result. Though, in retrospect, going the other way around might have actually still been better. Either way, welcome to the Veteran Sergeant painting stream. Hope you get something out of it. I'll be here till 6 Central Time. I may even go over because I don't have anything going on afterwards. So we may go until I just feel like I have to stop and eat something. But we start at 2 p.m. on Wednesdays as of yesterday. Well, I mean, obviously, today is the first Wednesday, but we decided to move it to Wednesdays at 2 p.m. yesterday. Just works better given my work schedule and everything that's going on in my world. So... And plus we were on... we had been Twitch, then we switched to Facebook for a little while, and there were too many technical issues, so we just came back to Twitch, and actually I'm very glad to be back on Twitch. So thank you for joining us. By us, I mean me and my cat, who is lavishing her attention on my feet, which you cannot see. But she's there. Yep. Hey, there she is. There we go. Sorry for breaking the fourth wall. Builderus. Thank you. I'm glad to be back. Certainly am. Are you a new visitor to the stream, or have you been with us before? Your name seems familiar, but I might have seen you somewhere completely different. Alright, well, I hope you enjoy it. And if you're, of course, into miniature wargaming, there's a whole lot of other stuff on this channel, Bell of Lost Souls. And you can check out the website. I am but a small part, a humble cog, if you will, of the Bowls network. Larry, who runs Bell of Lost Souls, is a good friend of mine, and I like painting, and I've been wanting to do a painting stream. Not anything, you know, super serious, but just for fun. And he needed some, you know, variety on the stream, some painting and stuff like that. And so I was happy to oblige. So I hope you guys get something out of it. But, you know, if you're looking for other types of material, battle reports and news about miniature wargaming and what's coming up new and things like Warhammer and so on, definitely keep an eye on this channel and check out Bell of Lost Souls and see if they've got content that appeals to you. And of course, there's always plenty of heated discussion on you know, important topics that affect all of our lives, such as are Dark Eldar overpowered, and the like. Occasionally dry brushing, if you didn't hear me say earlier, occasionally when you're dry brushing, you get little fuzzies here and there. You just want to make sure you clean them up before you end up painting them onto your model permanently in some way or another. Which reminds me, it's probably a good time to give it a good blast here. Apologize if this hurts your ears at all. Alrighty, that should take care of most of it. Alright, so that definitely gives us, a little bit more liveliness to this base. And we haven't even started highlighting them yet. They're just painted in a dark green, awaiting a highlight. Let's see here. Alright. So, I know we've acquired a few new people the last little bit. So what we're working on here is a Farstrider from Shadespire Farstriders gang. This is the leader of the three-man warband. And we're just working on sort of a decent paint job, not anything like, we're not going for prizes or anything here. We're just going for looks good on the game board. A little bit more than just your regular tabletop standard, but not drastically beyond that. And so we're employing a lot of dry brushing and some other shortcut techniques. But some things are still going to need direct attention. Whoop. For instance, if I drop it repeatedly and then have to repaint all the things I've chipped off. You'll have to forgive me if I seem a little loopy today. I have not had much sleep, so it's probably exactly the case. Now that the cats have been in here, I have to look out for all of the fur. Certainly don't want that becoming a permanent part of your model. Alright, just giving the leaves an easy highlight here with... We started, in case you're curious, with Caliban Green from Citadel. Now we're doing Warpstone Glow. For our first highlight of the leaves. And in case anyone's wondering, if you have any burning questions about anything that I painted on this model so far, or what I plan to do, assuming I have a plan yet, please feel free to ask. I'll answer any questions related to painting this model that you might have. Might even answer questions completely not related to models at all, simply out of whimsy or boredom. So, do not be shy. at the same time, don't feel compelled to come up with something to talk about, because after all, this is our first day back on Twitch, and so the viewership's going to be a little small today. So if you just want to chill out and watch, that is always an option. Feel free. Just relax and enjoy the soothing droning, not drowning, could be drowning, sound of my voice. Or my cat's meowing, which you probably can also hear in the background. Her meows are now getting a little bit more plaintive. There you go. Yeah. So for this first highlight on these leaves, you're just trying to emphasize the contours of the leaf, each leaf, rather. So these raised areas are obvious targets. But kind of what you want to try to do is pull the paint away from the middle towards the edge. Not every leaf is conducive to it. But so what I'm doing is I'm putting a little bit on a part of the leaf, and having it just wet enough where I can still manipulate it a little bit after it's on, and then I sort of push it towards the edge. So you see here, put it on, and then I sort of push it away from the middle towards the edge. And if you're ever, you know, working on something where you're trying to manipulate the paint after it's already on the model, you know, you put a little bit of wet paint on there and you want to push it around, and you just can't get it to work, the problem may not actually be you, it may be your brush. Your brush may just be the kind that doesn't have the reservoir to keep your paint from drying too quickly once it hits your model. So if that's an issue you're having, you may consider looking at some different brushes, which is a whole other discussion. Because people can go on for days about their preference in brushes, and you can have some heated discussion over the matter. The globe-spanning consequences of which Kolinsky Sable brush you decided to get. But needless to say, there are, or maybe I do need to say, there are a lot of options, a lot of them good. It really just falls into, you know, trying one that you like, and basically sticking with that. I use these Raphael 8404s for most of the stuff I do, but there's certainly... I have a ton of brushes that I use for other things, though. This is my pretty much go-to general purpose brush, particularly for detail work. But I have a ton of other brushes for other tasks, not least of which is dry brushing. Alright, almost done with the first highlight on the leaves. Starting to come together. Base is coming to life now, finally. So, any of you European viewers there, do you guys get Dr. Pepper out there? Do we export that stuff? Or Mr. Pibb, any of the imitators of Dr. Pepper? Because if not, you guys are missing out for sure. And now we're gonna just hit the edges with Citadel Moot Green. Give us some extreme highlights. Sort of extreme. Just looking at something here. Alrighty. That's right, Moon's Blade. Well, you know, in a manner of speaking, this is actually from Shadespire, from the Farstriders warband. Let me change the focus a little bit here, because we're starting to move to a little bit of different of a range. And right now we're working on finishing up his base, and then we're going to start working on other details of the model. So we're glad you could join us. We're just going for good, you know, for a good quality paint job, for you know, for playing a low model count game like Shadespire. Since I don't have to paint 50 of them, I only have to paint 6 Stormcast Eternals between 2 different war bands. You can spend a little bit more time with them, but I'm not trying to go crazy either, because I'm not submitting these guys into a competition or anything like that. So I just want to give them a decent paint job. And so I took some shortcuts, did the armor via a dry brush technique. This old log was also done using a dry brush, though I think I may add some stuff to it, because I think it needs something more. And right now I'm just adding some final highlights to these leaves. I see we got some new viewers. If you have any questions about anything I'm doing or that I've done, feel free to ask. So, have any questions about what I'm painting, how I painted it, or, you know, completely unrelated topics to painting, like you need help on your organic chemistry homework, why not? Because chat is open. We don't have a huge viewer count at the moment, because we're just coming back after trying out Facebook streaming for a while. And so people have not gotten used to us being around here at this time yet. You know, used to have a pretty decent viewership, so we'll build it up again. Decent in terms of a painting stream. Painting streams don't get nearly the viewership of like video game streams, of course. Because you're starting with a smaller crowd to begin with, and not as many people who are into miniature painting are quite as interested in watching other people do it. Not to say there's not interest there, of course is. I certainly am interested in it, because I like seeing what other people are doing and how they're doing it. But a lot of the time, you get people who are extremely good painters, and you know, you see what they do and you're like, wow, that's amazing, and I think I could do that, but I don't have time to do that. I've got to finish, I've got to finish an entire army, or I've got to finish, a war band. And I just really can't spend, weeks on one model. And I'm hoping that most of the stuff I paint on my stream falls in the category of the kind of paint job that people are looking for to get their armies on the table, but still have very respectable paint jobs. They're not going for just the 3-color and get it on the board. They want a little bit more than that. And I'm hoping that I can provide that. And sometimes I overdo it. Sometimes I will spend an entire stream just like painting like one guy's cloak. So we're certainly not immune to the that dynamic. But for the most part, trying to go for what I guess a lot of people would call the high tabletop standard, for what someone would do if they were trying to get maximum points at a at a gaming event. But not necessarily winning, the individual painting competitions. Not to say that you couldn't, but it all depends on the competition. So, well, I'm glad you find it relaxing, Moon's Blade, because if you find my voice grating at all, you're probably going to very quickly tire of this channel, because I tend to fill the air quite a bit. I should consider, if there was a way, I would try to do it so there was like an option to like turn off my voice and just hear the music. Because I have no doubt there are at least a few people who would probably take advantage of that option. Adjust the camera a little bit. Hold on. There. I'm a little bit more in frame now, still maintaining the illusion that this is a gray wall behind me. Yep. And I agree, Moon's Blade. It's good every now and then to have someone who will talk continuously, even sometimes if the conversation is only one way. But I mean, isn't that sort of how we got used to shows? I mean, when I was watching Bob Ross as a kid, I couldn't ask Bob Ross questions. I couldn't talk to him and ask him how he was doing and, what he was up to and, how did he do that thing that he just did that I missed because I just joined the show. And now Twitch affords us so much interactivity. But it also affords us a lot of options, I don't have like a captive audience, and I certainly don't have nearly the following, of course, that Bob Ross has, or even has still. I mean, I will never have as many viewers while I'm alive as Bob Ross has had while he's dead. Not even close, in fact. So... Well, I'm glad, Moon's Blade. That's really the reason why I do this. I am not a professional streamer. I just stream 3 hours once a week, and it's mostly just to spend some time with my fellow hobbyists and share knowledge. And for those of you who are new here to the Bell of Lost Souls Twitch channel, you notice that it's not called the Veteran Sergeant Twitch channel because this is actually a variety stream. We do a variety of miniature war games related subjects. I am but one humble member of two painters that we have that stream here. Thomas, aka the Goat Boy, will be streaming later on tonight. It is almost 5 p.m. here, and he will begin at 8 p.m. And he is certainly a very entertaining person, and if you're looking to finish an army quickly, to figure out techniques for getting an army from the painting board onto the table very fast, he is certainly one of the people to see, because he can churn out models like mad. So he used to do high volume commissions, probably still does high volume commissions, I really don't know. And so he's very accustomed to painting an army very quickly. You know, there's sort of minimum number of steps, but also at the same time making them very striking. And he accomplishes a lot of that because he's actually a well-trained artist and understands color extremely well. And as a result, you could, if you wanted, you could give Goat Boy like a paint set and a box of Q-tips, not even brushes. You give him a box of Q-tips and he will paint you an army that looks good on the tabletop. And it's because he understands extremely well how color works. And so while he is completely capable of doing really fine detail work, a lot of the time he's really going for the overall look of how a unit or army looks on the battlefield together. And for that, he is known for accomplishing things very quickly. And for some people it can be surprising to them how good his stuff looks given how quickly he can do it. Whereas I'm a little bit more deliberate. Actually, let's say a lot more deliberate. I take a lot longer. But at the same time, I am no Matt Fontaine, not going world class here. Going with practical. By the way, if you don't know who Matthew Fontaine is, he is an amazing world-class painter. Should definitely check him out if you get a chance and see some of his work. I do not know if he streams or does YouTube or anything like that, but I know he used to have a Patreon where he would do some tutorial videos of his, but there are some amazing painters out there if you know where to look, and he's definitely one of them. just as there are also quite a few good, really good painting streamers. There are definitely quite a few I know who definitely are better than me, hands down, and will employ much more advanced stuff. So if you are hungry for more, and this is not quite enough, there are definitely some really amazing painting streamers out there you can check out. Keep picking up lint from something. Building proxies? So you mean like you do a lot of conversion work then, or like you'll make an entire Tyranid army out of like mechanical looking stuff? Things like that? Like I saw one year, actually I think it was just a year ago, maybe it was two, convention, somebody had an entire Imperial Guard army that was converted to look like Cobra from G.I. Joe. Oh wow. I have not built a defiler in a long time, but I did not build mine from scratch. So, I actually got the original defiler, like, before it was... Actually, I would say before it was released, but sort of just like as it was being initially released. Alrighty, I think that's all of our leaves highlighted. Yeah, I'm liking that. Did I miss this one? No, I didn't. But let's give it a little enhancement. It was, yeah, I mean, they use the same model now that they had back then. It hasn't changed at all. And it's kind of interesting how I got it, because it was back at a time when, you know, I mean, GW has improved a lot in the last few years, but they had a time for a while where they were not a terribly great company in terms of how they treated the, you know, their loyal fan base. And there was a time when it was worth getting subscriptions to White Dwarf versus just buying it at your game store. And they used to give you sort of perks. I think it was either a 1 or 2 year subscription, and you got like a free like box, like, you know, like a vehicle of some kind. And so there were a few options for that year when I re-upped my subscription, and I could have got like, I don't think it might have been a Land Raider, maybe like you could get a Predator, or, you know, basically any of like, you know, the medium, what we'd now consider a medium-sized model kit, you know, like a, you know, an ordinary vehicle or something. I mean, back then they didn't have, you know, the huge things like, you know, plastic Baneblade was still not even out yet, much less these, you know, mini Titans that you can get now. But I asked them, hey, is there any way I can get a defiler? And he's like, I'm not sure because it's not on the list of things we can get you, but it is in that price range. But, you know, I'll see what I can do, but I can't make any promises. Like, okay, I can accept that. That's cool. So I was totally expecting to get, like, something completely different, like just another vehicle that I already had, like, a dozen of. But instead, in the mail, I actually got a defiler, and I was extremely happy with that because it was definitely a part of my army list that I was getting ready to make, because this was the late 3rd edition Chaos Codex that introduced the defiler, and that codex was nothing less than transformational for Chaos Space Marines, because their first codex for 3rd edition was rather lackluster, didn't give you a whole lot of options, and was not very competitive. And then the new one they got, sort of like middle or late 3rd, was super strong. And then 4th edition came along and, you know, basically turned Chaos into this bland, uninteresting, very generic army. And it stayed that way for quite a while, unfortunately. But I think things are heading in a much better direction now. We're starting to see a whole lot more interesting armies coming out from Games Workshop. And I think they understand that, you know, people want their armies to have some character to them. Now, don't get me wrong, they're not completely off the hook yet. There's still quite a few things that, you know, I take issue with in regards to, like, sort of how they build armies right now. But I think they're getting a better grasp on things now. Oh, okay, yeah, 1st and 2nd. I started playing in probably what you would call late 2nd. So, you know, 96, I think. And 2nd was a lot of fun. It wasn't exactly what you'd call a serious game, of course, you know. But even now, I wouldn't really call 40K like a super serious game. It's not balanced well enough to be taken all that seriously. But even then, it's still much more competitive than it was back then. Because back then the combinations were just kind of ridiculous that you could do, and you just really couldn't take it seriously, because you never knew what was going to happen in that game back then. No, they're definitely not there yet, and you know, there are some things that are just going to give them problems, you know, forever until they decide that they're done with it. And this is just my opinion, of course, but I believe that allies, you know, like soup obviously was a big problem for 40K 8th edition. And they've toned it down a bit, but it's still a thing, you know. And I think as long as it's around, they're going to have a hard time balancing codices. Not just vis-a-vis each other, but also just, making a codex that can stand on its own and not have to rely on allies. Or even worse, just not work on its own because of the fact that it has units that are desirable as allies in other armies, and as a result they don't really get the treatment they need to work internally. I think there aren't a ton of examples of that, but one I'm going to cite is Grey Knights. It's an army that people will pull units from as allies, but rarely will you ever see like Grey Knights in competition as a Grey Knights army. Certainly not pure. And I think every army should be able to run well and be competitive. Not everybody necessarily winning, but just making it in the running and doing well with just the stuff that comes in your codex, Oh yeah, first edition psychic powers, second edition psychic powers were crazy too. I mean, they both were insane. I mean, I remember stuff like Plague Wind. This wasn't some crazy, rare psychic power. It was any Nurgle sorcerer could cast it, and it had pretty good range and would hit a unit. You rolled 3d6, and for every point out of that 3d6 that you rolled over the unit's toughness, they just straight up took a wound. And every 2 models that they lost, a plague bearer spawned in the middle of their unit. I mean, it was just insane. I mean, could you imagine if you could do that now? Actually, you know what? That would be amazing if you could do that now. That would probably solve a lot of problems right now with how many low toughness units you see that just get spammed like crazy. But that's not really the problem. The real problem with I think the real reason why large cheap units are sort of the flavor right now for 8th edition, sort of have been since it came out, is just the fact that either elite units are just too expensive, or cheap units are just too cheap. Yeah. Oh yeah. And then there was, and remember in 2nd edition when Tyranids could just keep putting, their biomods on things. I can't remember what they were called, but you could just keep on modding like a Carnifex until he had like 10 wounds and 10 strength and 10 toughness. It just gave him all 10 stat line across the board, and it wasn't even all that expensive to do it. So you'd have like several Tyranids on the board with like a stat line of almost 10s all the way across. And there was this neat Slaanesh spell, and I think it was 2d6, and if you rolled over their leadership, they just automatically melted into a puddle or turned into a spawn or something. And while that seemed like, man, it would take forever to finally kill something that way, when you were facing up against something with that kind of stat line, that was like your one way of dealing with them. So, that spell actually turned out to be pretty useful. Or you just throw a vortex grenade at them, that also works. Which reminds me, the first time I ever played against Tyranids in 2nd edition, I had a Lictor appear right next to my Plague Marines, And I was just like, ah! I didn't know what the hell it was, so I was just like, here, throw the vortex grenade at it. So, nowadays a lictor is not considered much of a threat. Even then, it wasn't really like a big threat. My Plague Marines probably could have dealt with it, but nope. I just threw a vortex grenade, sucked him into the warp. Probably should have saved it for the Carnifex, the big scary uber modded Carnifex. Of course, I used to run Ahriman with a displacement field, which was always hilarious. And then a good solution to a lot of those Tyranid monsters was also to have Abaddon. Because all he had to do was hit, which was not as easy back then, but once he hit, things pretty much just auto-died at that point. Because of how powerful Draknian was back then. You didn't even have to roll to wound, I don't think. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was kind of odd, because you could buy a Vortex Grenade for each of your, veteran sergeants or champions or whatever you had, for whatever army you were playing. But your characters still had to have different loadouts. So you had to give one a chainsword and another one a power fist or something like that, to make them different, even though essentially they're all just carriers for vortex grenades. Oh yeah, but there were some units that were just clearly, that just clearly outmatched everything way beyond their points value. I remember one of my first games, I borrowed someone's Eldar army, and I had some Harlequins. I had a unit of Death Jesters, a unit of them, and oh, thank you. I had a unit of Death Jesters, and I had this Ultramarine army bearing down on me, and I just nearly wiped them out to a man before they could get to me, just with that one unit, and then a unit of Swooping Hawks. Alright, so I'm going to figure out what I can do here with this tree to make it a little bit more interesting. First thing I need is, yep, I think this is what I need right here. First, let's clean it up a little bit. I think I see some. Yeah, Harlequins back then were, you know, almost like one-man armies. Yeah, Harlequin Kiss was, wow. Yeah, because, I mean, for a cheap weapon that was really effective against infantry, it was also super effective against vehicles, because it could actually penetrate like a Land Raider pretty easily. I don't remember what its penetration value was, but it was pretty crazy for something like that. Yeah, I barely remember those things, but yeah, I mean, every Harlequin weapon in 2nd edition was insane, though. There were no exceptions to that. And of course, characters were just ridiculous. They were so hard to kill back then. Like, I remember a friend of mine, I would play Chaos with Ahriman, and he would play Ultramarines with Tigurius. And we would just fight each other for turns and turns and turns and never get anywhere, because as soon as somebody got hit, they would just displacer field somewhere else, like, you know, half a foot to a whole foot away, and it would just never end. And then we'd cast spells at each other, which would never work out, because, you know, the person defending would find some way to try to end the psychic phase quickly, usually with power drain. And remember when las cannons were actually really good, and everybody took them because they were really good? I remember having a Predator Annihilator, and the first time I ever played against IG, I just drove my Annihilator in the middle of a street and aimed at 3 different tanks. I aimed at a Chimera, a Hellhound, and a Leman Russ. I shot the Leman Russ with the twin linked, and then shot another Sponson las cannon, one each, at the Chimera and Hellhound, and I killed all 3 of them that turn. And, I mean, yeah. And then 3rd edition came out, no one saw Predator Annihilators anymore. They just kind of vanished. And it's weird because what was considered the wimpy Predator back, you know, in 2nd, suddenly became the only Predator you ever saw anyone deploy. Oh yeah, definitely. And that was, one thing. Even in 3rd edition, people would still bring lascan heavy, forces, where the main weapon that, infantry heavy teams would have would be las cannons. Then it kind of got weird for a while and went to auto cannons. Yeah. Oh yes, the human bombs. Oh man, I remember the Penal Legion guys. If they broke, like I can't remember how it worked. I think either they had like a ridiculous leadership and they would just die if they ran, or they like would not run but would just like lose guys instead. Sort of similar to how some of the morale mechanics work now. And I think it was like, not only did your commissars like kill off troops to maintain morale, but sometimes like the unit would end up killing the commissar. But I can't remember what triggered that. Maybe if the unit failed to roll twice? I don't know. Because I didn't play IG back then, I only played against them a few times. But they were pretty funny. Alright. It's coming along. Let's give this a light wash. Agrax. Still feel like there's more I need to do with this log. Not least of all is the fact that, because it's kind of a golden brown color, and I was kind of worried about this when I was starting it in the first place. This sort of golden brown color kind of makes it mesh, like blend in almost too well with the, the gold metal of the model itself. Of the Farstrider himself, to be more specific. And so I may need to find some other way to make them a little bit more distinct from each other. Oh. Yeah, and that's one thing that people sometimes forget when they're doing a model. Like if you look at this guy's crossbow and you look at his base, they actually look similar because this is gray and this is just metallic gray. So in a way, though, they actually sort of unify the aesthetic because it's not just gray down here. There's some gray, in other places too, even though it's a very different kind of gray. I mean, in terms of tone shade, they're actually kind of similar, just one is metallic. But where that kind of creates consistency for the overall model, this log, you know, being this sort of golden brown color, goes too well in terms of like sort of making the distinction between the model, the guy, the figure standing on top of the log and the log itself a little too, you know, a little too weak. There's not a whole lot of distinction between them. So I'm going to try to find a way to alleviate some of that. But I gotta wait for this wash to dry first, and the wash itself actually has helped a little bit, but I'm thinking about adding some gray streaking to it. That's my first thought. But we'll get to that in a bit. For now, I'm gonna hit up some of these details here. And it's always my first rule, never be afraid to experiment. Come on, camera, cooperate with me here. Alright. Sorry, we're in drunken mode for a moment. Luckily, this camera here does not, I don't use the autofocus for that, so if the miniature is blurry, then it's not the equipment's fault, it's my fault. Trying to figure out which trim elements I want to be gold on the crossbow. So I had it originally all solid silver, and I was not happy with that. It was just a little too monotone. And of course, Citadel's way was to paint some of the elements of the housing on it black, like the receiver, like around here is like black and stuff. But that didn't appeal to me. That option did not appeal to me, so trying something else here. Let's see something here. I think I see. A few intruders here. Alright. Tough part about this is, had I done this earlier, I would have easily been able to do all the gold and then paint the silver on and highlight them together. but because this is out of the normal order of operations, things get a little bit more complicated. Alright. I'm going to add a second wash just to these little sort of, I guess you'd call them heartwood elements. The first wash we did was thinned down quite a bit, but for these ones it definitely needed to be at its full strength here. So, alright. As you can see, the inside of the cloak not nearly done here. Like this outside, much closer to finished, but still needs a little bit here and there. And of course this cloak, need to do all this textured fur here, and then got to do all those little blue parts, and then I got to figure out how to paint the burb. Alright, need some bright silver. Runefang steel, always a good solution for that. Runefang steel is actually very handy for things like, believe it or not, highlighting gold. Even though it is a silver, actually it works very well for giving an extreme highlight to your gold stuff. In this case, it's not even really an extreme highlight because I'm not focusing it just on one area, but it's more like a final highlight. Sometimes I use the terms interchangeably, but sometimes, a lot of the time, when I say extreme highlight, I mean more than what like most of the other parts, similar parts of the model are going to get. For example, like the face of a miniature sometimes warrants an entirely different highlight from the other elements of the model that are basically the same color. And the reason for that is it draws more focus towards the face, which is a place where you want a lot of the focus. In this case, you can see the dry brush I did with the silver is just a little bit heavier on the face than it is on the other parts of the armor, and that is for that reason. we're just going to take a little bit of the original color that we had for this heartwood, I guess you could call it, the internal wood, which this tree lacks quite a bit of, being, you know, kind of hollow there. But there's a couple of places where there's still some wood left on the inside, and I think that warrants a little bit different color, sort of differentiate it from the bark on the outside. I may choose to highlight it a little bit more with something else. Maybe not. We'll see. We got to figure out what we're going to do with the rest of the log first before I can really make a good decision on that one. Alright, so now I gotta figure out what's a good color I can use to try to make this log a little more interesting and different from the main model. So what I'm going to try is a little bit of streaking with this Baneblade brown and see if that can give us what we want. And it may not be apparent right away either. First we'll have to take sort of a step back view and see how the colors look, and then take a lot more steps for the does it look good up close question. Which, when you do stuff like this, it's going to need some glazing and other things to sort of tie things together. But we'll worry about all of those steps in a bit. Right now, we just want to know, is the color going to change it up enough? And does it look natural enough, like woody enough, that we think we can use it? So a lot of these will have to be thinned, a lot of these will have to be, well, some of them will just get eliminated. We just want to see. Well, the silver is super easy. For the silver, all I did was I painted it Leadbelcher, then gave it a careful wash of Agrax Earthshade. You know, not going crazy, just trying to give it nice and even so that I wouldn't get like little pools here and there that I'd have to clean up later. And then I just dry brushed Runefang Steel over it. So yeah, real simple 3-step process. Just getting yourself sort of a semi-clean looking metal. And the Agrax gives it a little bit of, you know, it's not, you know, a lot of people like to use Nuln Oil, but I like to use Agrax because it is a brown, so it has a little bit of color saturation to it, which I think makes it look a little more interesting than when you just use Nuln Oil, which is just black. I don't know. I think it could work as a streaking color, but I'm not sure if it's going to break up the look enough. Just try glazing it just a little bit. Because I think the only color that's actually, you know, blending it in with the figure itself is the sort of orangey brown we're using for the highlight, which is this Iroko, as they call it. And it's part of a little technique we've been wanting to try for a while, because it came from a company called Asset Drop. So if you've never seen these guys, they have little kits you can get, and they will tell you how to do certain things, and they send you the paints to actually do these. So, you know, they had a step-by-step to do, you know, some wood. And the results are certainly good. Yeah, there's definitely no problem with these colors for painting a log. The problem is that the colors just go too well in with this gold model, that they kind of disappear a little bit. It's not really accurate to say they disappear, but the distinction between the model and the log is not distinct enough. So I'm going to try to find some way to make them contrast each other more. And so I'm going to probably have to go away from these colors, even though I think these are good colors for doing rotted wood. I think just in this context with this model and its colors, it creates a problem. So we're going to just highlight this gold here on the base. Now, does that mean I couldn't get away with this? No, I could leave it like this, and it would be fine. Not too many people that I know would complain. Though I also know who would probably point out that they thought that was kind of a weird way to do the composition, and I would agree with them. But I thought I'd experiment with it. And I have to say, unfortunately, it turned out as I expected. Alright. So, let's sort of hit the reset button here and use our original base color that we had for this. Luckily, something like this, you know, a tree, you could probably paint over this thing 50 times and it wouldn't matter, because the tree here, interestingly enough, is kind of cartoony compared to a lot of other ones you'll see with miniatures. For example, you know, like the ones I showed you a minute ago in the Asset Drop booklet, see, their rotted wood is very, you know, broken up, very, you know, deep gashes, and, you know, all the convolutions are very deep. They're very numerous. You know, there's not a lot of flat space, you know, in between the grooves in the bark. Whereas here, you know, it's sort of more cartoony, you know, where where there's more flat spaces between the crevices in the bark, and it makes it a little bit harder to use certain techniques that work well for painting wood, like in the other picture. Which I actually prefer. I would prefer if it was like that. But regardless, this is still good. I mean, you know, this log is a pretty cool element of this model's, you know, overall design. You know, its composition, its layout. It definitely gives it some dynamism. You just got to figure out what makes it work with the model in terms of color. And once we figure that out, most of the other stuff on the model is pretty easy beyond that. Just applying the color. But this is the one, you know, difficult part. So, yeah. I still think this base color is good. And in fact, it's so similar to Mournfang Brown, I don't even know if I need to switch from Mournfang Brown, you know, the base color that I use for the whole model, because here's some Mournfang Brown, just as an example. It is a bit different when you actually put them on next to each other, so this is certainly a much more, you know, muted, sort of woody brown, versus this, which is more like, you know, a leathery brown. So, but we don't have enough time today to really go into that. The technique I already had for the wood is perfectly fine. Like I said before, it just doesn't work well in the context of a big golden guy standing on top of it, because it itself is fairly golden, if you see here, the part I haven't painted over yet. And so I just want to change it to something that's going to contrast more with the rest of the model. And so I need to brainstorm some ideas for that. In the meantime, there's plenty of other stuff to work on this model, so we'll see what we can do with it for the about 10 minutes that we have remaining for today's stream. So we've got these elements that were previously silver that we changed to gold. Let's see if we can since the other gold elements are dry brushed on, we just have to sort of carefully and this may actually yeah, those aren't going to really so we should probably just dry brush and then clean up our silver afterwards. It's probably going to give us results that are more consistent with the rest of the model. And that's probably the easier way to go here, especially since that's what I'm going to do when I begin the other two, which, you know, are only just barely started. So this is how this guy started originally. So I would just add the gold dry brush to the elements of the crossbow that I want to be gold, and then I would paint on the silver. And then after washing the silver, then I would dry brush both the gold and the silver at the same time with the Runefang steel, because they both have the same highlight. They both have the same silver color for their final highlight. Which is why that is, you know, easy to do at that phase. At this stage, it's a little bit more, a little bit trickier, but it should be fine. We'll go and touch up the silver. That gets gold on it, and you know, rewash if needed, and then do the highlight again. See if this can give me a decent dry brush without getting too much on the silver parts. It's probably a little heavier actually than I want it to be, but that's fine. There's a lot of steps remaining, so yeah, this dry brush not quite the same consistency as the originals. This might be a little too big. Let's try this one. That's better. Alright, there we go. That's more like what we're looking for. Alright. there's still several steps left before the gold's done, but I think here we're going to start seeing whether or not the gold elements added to the crossbow are going to make it more interesting or not. And I think so, once it's all said and done. Still some work to do to find out for sure, but alright, well, we made some good progress today. We got most of the base done. You know, I mean, essentially the base would be done if we didn't decide that that we wanted to do just kind of redo this log entirely. So, you know, and we got a couple of other elements caught up. But overall, we really spent, you know, the majority of the time was on the base. But I think we got good results with it. The leaves look really nice. I like how they look. And the leaves really tell us sort of like what the base composition is really going to look like. And I think right now when you look at it, like it already looks better just taking away the orangey highlights from the log. Obviously we can't just leave the log like this, but I'm going to find something different to do with it. And you guys will see next week what I came up with, or we'll end up coming up with it on stream. Depends on how soon I can get to finishing it. But I think we're on the right track changing it. I think it was a good idea to do so, because I can already see a lot better contrast between the figure and the log itself and the rest of the base as a whole. And then we also got to figure out the bird, because the bird is obviously not going to stay any semblance of this brown color. So, you know, we'll get him sorted out too. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. We're out of time, but you know, next time we'll be working either on this guy or other Farstriders, or we may even continue working on our Khorne guys. See, like Mogor here, who is almost complete. We just got I've experimented with one boot over here. I'm gonna try something else with the boot over here and see which one I like better. And then, of course, got to do his cloak, which is actually well on its way. But have no fear, if he is already done by the time we start next week, I still have other ones that are not quite as done that still need work to go. So there is plenty more to see from them if you're interested in the Khorne Blood Warriors. And then, of course, plenty more Stormcast Eternals as well for Shadespire, like this guy. We have lots to go, well, 5 other ones to go beyond this guy. So, tune in next week around 2 p.m. Central Time, and yeah, we'll keep working on that stuff. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you got something out of it. I need to go feed this cat, or she's going to start gnawing on my foot. So, until next time.